Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we enter the dim blue hour before sunrise, when an Alabama plantation seems almost quiet, almost peaceful, and yet nothing about it is gentle if you have to wake inside it. You can feel the air clinging to your skin before the day has even begun. You can hear frogs in the wet ground, insects ticking in the dark, and somewhere beyond the cabins a rooster trying to convince the world that morning is worth greeting. But what does dawn mean when your body is not your own? When the first sound you listen for is not birdsong but the call that tells you labour has started again. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're here, comment your location and local time, because I always love seeing where in the world you are listening from. Now, dim the lights, and you wake on rough boards or on a simple pallet stuffed with corn shucks, inside a cabin that still holds the breath of everyone sleeping near you. The room is close and dark. Even in silence, it is not truly still. A baby shifts somewhere in the corner. Someone coughs into a blanket. Wood gives a faint creak as another body turns carefully, trying not to wake the rest. Smoke from last night's fire lingers in the air, trapped in the cracks of the walls and in the cloth hanging from pegs. The smell is a mix of ash, damp earth, sweat, and old pine. It is the smell of living packed tightly together and starting again before the stars have fully faded. You do not rise slowly. Sleep is precious, but it is also fragile. Oversleeping is dangerous. On many plantations in Alabama in 1840, the day began before sunrise, especially during the cotton season, because enslaved labor was measured by daylight, discipline, and the demands of the crop. A horn, bell, or the shouted voice of an overseer could start the motion of the quarters. Sometimes the wake-up call came while the sky was still black. Sometimes it arrived when the horizon had only the thinnest silver line. Either way, your body learns to listen before your mind is ready. You sit up and feel the coolness of early morning on your arms. It will not last. Alabama heat has a mean sense of timing. Before noon, the air can become heavy enough to wear like a second shirt. But at this hour, just for a few moments, the world is cooler. The dirt floor is cold under your feet. Your clothes, hung or folded nearby, are stiff with yesterday's sweat. The fabric is coarse. It rubs at the neck and wrists. Plantation clothing allowances were often sparse, with rough homespun cloth issued to enslaved workers, and shoes could be scarce, ill-fitting, or saved for certain seasons. So you learn the feel of ground itself: mud, dust, splinters, frozen crust in winter, baked clay in summer. The earth becomes a second surface of life. Outside, the settlement of cabins begins to stir. Doors open in soft complaint. A little flame flickers in one doorway, then another. You hear a low murmur of voices, careful and tired. People do not waste words at this hour. Energy must be kept. Yet even here there is skill in the smallest movement. A woman ties a head wrap quickly with fingers trained by repetition. A man straightens a tool handle he brought back for mending. An older child shakes a younger one awake with the kind of firmness that belongs to someone who has already learned there is no kindness in being late. The cabins themselves are built for use, not comfort. On some plantations they are log structures with clay chinking pushed into the gaps. On others they are simple frame cabins, weathered and thin. Scholars who study slave housing in the Deep South often note that conditions varied by wealth, region, and owner, but no one mistakes variation for generosity. One cabin might hold a family, another might hold several unrelated people. Privacy is scarce, warmth is improvised, safety depends more on each other than on the building. You step into the yard and the plantation slowly reveals itself. The big house sits at a distance, larger, quieter, already establishing the hierarchy before a single order is spoken. Nearby are smokehouses, sheds, perhaps a gin house if cotton is the main crop, perhaps barns, perhaps animal pens. Alabama in 1840 was deeply tied to cotton production, especially in the rich Black Belt counties whose dark soil drew planters westward in the decades after native nations were dispossessed and removed. That fertile land made fortunes for enslavers. It made endless labour for everyone else. Even the ground seems enlisted. The sky lightens from black to grey to a pale washed blue. Mist rests low over fields and creek edges. Dew beads on weeds and fences. For a moment, it looks beautiful in an almost offensive way. Nature can be so rude like that. It puts a pearl shine on suffering and expects applause. Before heading to the fields, there may be food to prepare or collect. Breakfast is rarely a feast. It may be cornmeal made into mush or hoe cakes, maybe a little molasses, maybe leftovers from the night before, maybe nothing until a later pause. Much depends on the plantation, the season, and what can be managed in the little time allowed. A cast iron pot, blackened by constant use, sits over coals. The smell of cornmeal rising with wood smoke is plain and familiar. Hunger sharpens every scent. You eat quickly because slowness is a luxury, and luxuries have a way of disappearing under the watchful eyes. Water must be carried. Fire must be coaxed back to life. Small children must be settled with whoever is too old, too young, or temporarily assigned elsewhere. Older women sometimes care for infants while others go to work, though many mothers are forced into the fields not long after childbirth. You can hear the logic of the system in its cruelty. Every task is counted. Every body is evaluated. Every hour belongs to someone claiming ownership. And yet, beneath that claim, another life moves quietly, a shared glance, a hand on a shoulder, a quick warning about someone's mood today, a scrap of food slipped to a child. These are not grand gestures. They are the daily grammar of survival. They say, without ceremony, "You are seen." The plantation is a place of forced labour, but it is also a place of constant observation. You learn how to read footsteps, posture, tone. The overseer's distance matters. The owner's presence changes everything. Some enslaved people worked under white overseers, others under drivers, who were often enslaved men placed in a brutal position within the labour system. Historians debate how much power drivers truly held, and how much room they had to soften or intensify discipline. The records are uneven, and the truth shifts from plantation to plantation. What remains clear is that everyone under slavery had to study power like weather. You move toward the gathering point with others from the quarters. Tools are lifted, shoulders rolled, hands flexed against the coming strain. The sounds grow sharper now. Chickens scratch near the cabins. A mule snorts from a lot. Harness leather creaks. Somewhere metal strikes wood with a clean, hard tap. Dawn has passed from atmosphere into instruction. Children notice things adults stop naming aloud. The shimmer of spider webs between fence rails. The shape of clouds above the pines. The fact that one rooster is missing 3 tail feathers and still behaves like a prince. That kind of detail lives in everyone. Really. Even when nobody has time to mention it. One quirky account from plantation life in the South describes enslaved people using everyday natural signs, like bird calls or the behaviour of animals, as bits of local knowledge to judge weather or movement. Whether every such story is literal or slightly polished in memory, the larger truth feels right. When your world is controlled by others, you become an expert in noticing what they ignore. As the first work orders come, the body begins its separate conversation with the day. Your back is not yet aching, but it remembers how. Your hands are not yet raw, but they know what waits. Muscles hold memory as faithfully as the mind. Alabama's plantation economy in 1840 depended on that repeated physical knowledge. Cotton cultivation demanded clearing, hoeing, planting, weeding, and later picking, with each season bringing its own rhythm of exhaustion. Even before the harvest months, fieldwork pressed hard from sunrise onward. You are counted, that is important. Counted for labour, not for care. Account books can record names, ages, values, shoes issued, cloth distributed, days lost to illness, births entered like property increase. To the enslaver, writing makes ownership look tidy. To you, the truth is messier and much more human. A person's laugh cannot be listed properly. Neither can fear. Neither can the way a mother listens for her child's breathing before stepping outside. Ledger books are very confident about what they matter. They are wrong, of course, but wrong in expensive handwriting. The road to the fields, or the path between buildings, is worn smooth by repetition. You walk it with others in near silence, hearing the soft thud of feet and the rustle of clothing brushing dew-wet weeds. The morning smell changes as you leave the cabins, smoke fades, wet grass rises, turned soil has its own scent, rich and mineral, almost sweet. In low places, standing water gives off the green smell of mud and reeds. You hear birds start their sharper songs now that the light is clear enough to trust. For a few breaths. No one is speaking. It is not peace exactly. It is concentration. Day after day under slavery required this strange double awareness. One part of you performed what was demanded. Another part stayed watchful, private, alive. That inner room mattered. Without it, survival would flatten into obedience. With it, thought could remain your own, even when nearly everything else had been seized. Religious feeling could live in that inner room. So could memory. Many Black Americans held on to stories, songs, names, foodways, and spiritual practices shaped by family lines stretching across the Upper South, the Chesapeake, the Carolinas, and further back into Africa. Alabama plantations were filled with people carried through the domestic slave trade from older slave states. That meant the quarters could contain different accents, skills, and traditions braided together under terrible pressure. A lullaby might come from Virginia by way of a grandmother. A cooking method might carry traces of West African practice, adjusted to local ingredients and plantation restrictions. A phrase, a rhythm. A prayer might survive because someone repeated it softly enough and often enough. Historians still argue whether some cultural retentions can be traced clearly enough in every region to name with confidence. Evidence survives in fragments, and plantation records rarely cared to preserve enslaved meaning. But fragments matter. They tell you that identity did not vanish just because power tried to rename it. At the field edge, the light is stronger now. Rows stretch ahead in a geometry that pretends order can erase violence. A line of workers takes shape. Instructions come. The day opens like a clenched fist. Still. One woman adjusts her headscarf with neat precision. One man glances toward the sky, measuring weather. Someone hums half a note, then lets it go. Tiny acts. Human acts. They do not overthrow the plantation. They do something quieter. They refuse to let it define the whole of reality. And you stand there in the newborn morning of Alabama in 1840 not as a symbol, not as a shadow in somebody else's romantic plantation painting, but as a person with sore feet, alert ears, a guarded heart, and a mind already calculating how to get through the next hour. The sun lifts, the mist thins, the first command lands. Around you, the day begins in full, and survival begins with it. One breath, one step, one watched and measured movement at a time. By the time the sun clears the trees, the field is already awake in a harsher way than any cabin yard. Here the world opens wide and offers almost no shelter. Alabama light spreads quickly across the rows, washing the land in gold for a few innocent minutes, and then turning sharp enough to expose every clod of dirt, every bent stem, every hand that lingers too long. You step into that brightness carrying a hoe, and the tool feels like a fact, smooth where many palms have worn the handle, rough where splinters threaten, heavy enough to tie your shoulder before the real heat even begins. Cotton does not look grand at this stage. That is the trick of it. People talk about cotton as if it were white clouds and wealth and elegant trade. Out here it is soil, weeds, insects, and repetition. Endless repetition. In spring and early summer, much of the labour is hoeing and thinning, breaking crusted earth, clearing unwanted growth, and giving the plants room to rise. The rows stretch long and narrow, and the work asks for the same movement again and again until your back begins to speak in its own language of strain. You start with the line. Each person is placed in relation to the others, not too close, not too far, a human measuring system laid across the field. The overseer watches the spacing, the pace, the angle of your body. Sometimes he rides on horseback, which is a theatrical way to remind everyone that even laziness can be mounted if it belongs to the right man. Sometimes he walks with a switch or stick, boots pressing deeply into the soft ground while yours lift dust or sink into mud. The difference is never subtle. The soundscape of field labour has its own rhythm, Hoes strike earth with a dull chop. Dry weeds snap, dirt scatters. Breath comes through the nose in short measured bursts. Insects sing in the grasses at the row edges. A bird startles up now and then, offended that humans have once again chosen toil over common sense. Someone coughs. Someone mutters. Someone clears a throat as if preparing to speak and thinks better of it. Over all of it sits the possibility of command. That sharp human noise everyone has to hear instantly. The soil in Alabama's Black Belt can be dark and rich, heavy with the fertility that drew slaveholders into the region. Rich soil, of course, is wonderful news if you're a cotton plant. For the people forced to work it, richness has a more complicated personality. After rain, the ground clings to shoes and hems. In dry weather, it breaks into dust that settles on skin, lips, and eyelashes. You taste it while working. You smell it when the hoe turns it over in damp clumps. The field enters your mouth and lungs whether invited or not. Work is measured not only by time but by visible output. A clean row speaks for itself. A weedy one invites blame. On many plantations, enslaved field hands were expected to keep up a set pace from sunrise until dark, with short breaks for meals if allowed. Cotton culture rewarded speed, but not careless speed. You had to clear the weeds without damaging the crop, move quickly without appearing disorderly, and endure without collapsing. It was manual precision under coercion. You feel the body settle into the job, though settle is generous. The shoulders rotate. The wrist adjusts. The knees bend, rise, bend again. Soon the first sweat starts along the neck and under the arms. Soon more follows. A shirt that felt cool at dawn clings to your back. Coarse cloth rubs the skin with every reach. Sunlight reflects from pale dust and forces you to narrow your eyes. A fly lands on your cheek and leaves only when your shoulder jerks it away. Another replaces it with insulting confidence. The line moves forward through the rows. This is where skill matters. Experienced workers know how to guide the hoe close enough to be effective, but not so close that the blade cuts the roots of young plants. They know how to spot trouble quickly. They know how to conserve energy by making the body do only what is needed. No extra flourish, no wasted motion. That kind of expertise was often ignored by those in power, because acknowledging skill would mean admitting intelligence, and slavery depended on pretending intelligence only counted when owned by white men with ledgers. You learn to read the land as you work. A patch of thinner growth may mean poorer drainage. A certain weed might tell you the soil is holding moisture. Anthills rise at the row ends. Snakes favour some edges, especially near brush or water. Every plantation had local knowledge, and much of that knowledge lived in enslaved hands. A person might know exactly which part of the field bakes first under noonlight, or where the clay turns slick after even a brief rain. Such details could spare effort, prevent injury, or at least keep unpleasant surprises to a minimum. There is, in the middle of forced labour, an entire science of survival. You shift your grip before a blister opens. You keep breath steady instead of fighting the heat all at once. You glance sideways without moving your head much, checking whether another worker needs a silent warning about the overseer's mood. You take the smallest possible moment to straighten your spine before bending again. None of this looks dramatic. It is practical. It is also deeply human. Field gangs on Alabama plantations were often organized by age, strength, and ability. Prime adults did the heaviest labor. Older people, very young children, and those judged infirm might be assigned different tasks, though gentler work under slavery could still be punishing. Historians continue to disagree on how rigid gang systems were from plantation to plantation, especially in regions with mixed crops or smaller holdings. Records sometimes suggest strict organization, while oral testimony often reveals daily adjustments, improvisations, and contradictions. What is clear is that labor was sorted, watched, and exploited with relentless attention. Morning advances. The temperature climbs. Heat begins to press down from above and rise from below. The field loses its early softness. The air smells less like dew and more like bruised weeds, hot soil, and human sweat. You hear the droning of cicadas now, loud enough to seem mechanical, as if the trees themselves have joined the overseer in insisting on constant effort. The joke would be funny if it were not so rude. A brief pause for water can feel enormous. A dipper passed around. A barrel standing in shade if shade is available. Water warm already, perhaps with the taste of wood or iron, but still welcome enough to make your hands shake a little as you lift it. There is no romance in thirst. It narrows thought. It roughens temper. It teaches the body how long a single swallow can matter. Food carried to the field or eaten at midday is plain. Cornbread, bacon if available, cold leftovers, sometimes peas or sweet potatoes, sometimes not much at all. Enslaved people on plantations often had ration systems based on cornmeal and pork, supplemented when possible by gardens, fishing, hunting, or gathered foods. But out here in working hours, the concern is immediate. Can you eat quickly? Can you keep moving after eating? Can your stomach handle labour in the heat? That is the scale of daily calculation. Conversation in the field is risky but not impossible. It may come in fragments, shaped by distance and caution. A low remark about weather, a warning about a root under the soil, a soft joke that passes down the row and disappears before authority can catch it. Humour survives in remarkable places, even here, especially here. Sometimes it is dry enough to vanish almost as soon as spoken. Sometimes it hangs in the air long enough to change the posture of a whole line. A person can laugh without smiling much. That too is a skill. Music appears sometimes, though not always openly. Work songs, humming, short calls, rhythmic sounds made under the breath. Not every plantation allowed them freely, and not every moment invited them. Yet rhythm could help coordinate motion, steady breathing, or simply keep a private pulse alive beneath imposed labour. There are descriptions from enslaved communities across the South of songs used in work, worship, and daily life, though historians remain cautious about assigning one uniform pattern to every region and decade. What one field heard another may not have heard. Silence and sound both had their uses. The sun reaches that cruel middle height where shadows shrink and the world seems to flatten. Noon on open land is not just bright, it feels exposed, almost interrogated. Your skin prickles, sweat runs into the eyes, a hat, kerchief, or head wrap helps some, but only some. The back of the neck burns. The hands grow slick on the handle, then dry in patches where dirt and sweat turn into a fine gritty paste. You flex your fingers and feel the sting where skin has begun to rise or split. A person beside you works with astonishing steadiness. Another is slower today, perhaps ill, perhaps exhausted from a child's crying in the night, perhaps carrying the hidden ache of worry that never leaves. Illness did not always remove someone from the field. Plantation records sometimes note sickness, but the threshold for rest could be painfully high. A body could be feverish, pregnant, injured, grieving, and still expected to move. There is no neat separation between labour and suffering. The system blended them on purpose. One of the strangest things about such a day is how the mind travels while the body stays trapped in routine. You count strokes for a while, then stop. You notice clouds building in the distance. You wonder whether rain would help or hinder. You think of a recipe, a name, a prayer, a scrap of song, a child learning to walk, a person sold away years ago whose face you try not to let blur. Thought goes where it can. The field cannot fully control it. That inward life may be the least visible and most important part of endurance. Slaveholders like to imagine control as total. It was never total. They could command labour, inflict punishment, arrange sale, and intrude upon family life with devastating force. They could not perfectly map what a person remembered, hoped, feared, or refused within the private chambers of the mind. That hidden territory made all the difference. Not all labour in the fields was identical. Men, women, and children could be assigned overlapping tasks depending on the plantation's needs. Women were central to cotton production, performing intense field labour while also carrying many domestic burdens in the quarters. The sentimental myth that women under slavery were somehow shielded from hard agricultural work dissolves instantly in the Alabama sun. The cotton row did not care about gentility. Neither did the people who profited from it. Sometimes an overseer checks the row and finds fault because fault is the point: a missed patch, a bent plant, a pace judged too slow. The criticism may be loud enough for everyone to hear. Public correction keeps fear circulating. It also distorts time. Minutes can stretch thin under scrutiny. The body grows awkward when watched too closely, which is one of power's favourite little tricks. And yet, seasoned workers develop ways to keep going under that gaze. They fix the mistakes swiftly. They do not waste words. They recover rhythm. One person may subtly close a gap another has left. Someone else may take on a harder stretch of ground without announcing it. Cooperation can be tiny and nearly invisible, but it exists. Survival on a plantation was not only individual stamina, it was often collective intelligence practiced in small, protected gestures. By late afternoon, the field changes texture again. Light turns thicker, more golden, but not kinder. The plants cast longer shadows. The wind, if it comes, brings the warm smell of leaves and dust. Tiredness deepens from muscle to bone. This is when mistakes become easier. This is when the handle feels heavier, when every step at the row's end asks whether you're truly going to turn around and do it again. The answer, because slavery leaves little room for preference, is yes. Somewhere nearby, a mockingbird runs through stolen tunes from half the county. Show off. Even now the world contains creatures with leisure. That may be the day's rudest fact. Still, the line moves, row by row, stroke by stroke. The field that looked so immense in morning now bears the visible marks of human effort. Cleaned ground, ordered plants, disturbed weeds drying in the sun. None of this work belongs to the people doing it, yet their knowledge shapes every inch. The plantation pretends ownership begins and ends with paper. The land itself tells another story. It remembers whose hands actually touched it. When the order finally comes to stop, the relief is not dramatic, and no one bursts into joy. Tiredness is too complete for that. Instead, there is a loosening, almost a quiet untying inside the chest. You straighten slowly, feeling your spine complain. Your palms throb. Dirt has worked its way into every crease of skin. The field settles into evening sounds as tools are lifted and people turn away from the rows. A day's labour has been forced from body after body. Yet the fact that you stand, breathe, and keep hold of your own inner self still matters. Under a system built to grind people into output, the simple continuation of personhood is its own stubborn victory. When work finally releases its grip for the evening, you walk back toward the cabins with the slow, careful steps of someone whose body has already spent most of itself. The path home. If that word can even be allowed a quiet corner here, is crowded with tired movement. Feet drag through dust. A pail bumps against a leg. A child reaches for an older hand without saying much. The air has changed since morning. It is softer now, though still warm. And the light lies low across the yard in long strips of gold that make even worn fences look briefly dignified. The quarters sit apart from the planter's house, close enough to remain under notice, far enough to preserve the fiction that different worlds can exist on the same ground without constant moral screaming. Cabins line the yard in rough order. Some lean a little. Some hold the day's heat inside their walls. Some have tiny patches of swept earth in front, and those swept yards matter more than they might seem. A clean yard is not only about order. It is about claiming shape and care in a place designed to deny both. You approach the doorway and smell the evening before you step inside. Smoke from cooking fires drifts low through the settlement. Cornbread browns somewhere nearby. Pork fat crackles in an iron pan. Greens simmer with onion if onion can be had. Wood smoke settles into cloth, hair, and skin as naturally as breath. The scent is strong, practical, familiar. It tells you that the hardest hours of labour are over, even if the work of a living is not. Inside the cabin, the light is dim and moving. Flames from the hearth or a small lamp lick across the walls and leave the corners in shadow. Every object is useful. A stool, if there is one, a table, rough and scarred, blankets folded or hanging, a gourd dipper, a pot blackened by years of fire. The cabin is small enough that nothing is far from anything else. Wood walls hold sound. Babies cry and everyone hears it. Someone whispers and everyone hears that too. Housing for enslaved people in Alabama varied by plantation size and wealth, but comfort was never the point. A cabin might shelter a family, or several people who had no choice but to create some workable arrangement of life together. The walls could let in cold air in winter and their insects in summer. Roofs leaked. Floors might be puncheon, packed dirt, or uneven boards. Furniture was limited. Bedding was often crude. Yet within such narrow space, people still shaped routines of dignity. A folded cloth placed neatly, a cooking pot kept in good order, a broom made from brush. Small practices mattered because they pushed back against disorder. You set down what you carried and feel your shoulders answer with a dull ache. Evening work begins almost at once. Water must be fetched if the supply is low. Firewood must be gathered or split into smaller pieces. Clothes may need rinsing. Shoes, if you have them, may need drying or mending. A child's face is wiped with a damp rag. Another child is reminded to stay clear of the hearth. Rest exists, but it rarely arrives before several more tasks have been coaxed into completion. This is the hour when domestic skill turns necessity into survival. A woman needs cornmeal with practiced hands, her fingers moving fast despite fatigue. Someone else trims greens with a knife worn thin from sharpening. A man repairs a broken handle by the doorway, bracing wood between his knees and shaving it carefully. A teenage girl plats a young child's hair in swift, neat sections. None of these actions are theatrical. They are the choreography of evening, repeated so often that even exhaustion cannot quite undo them. The cabin yard fills with layered sound. Pots knock lightly against each other. Chickens complain as they settle. Dogs bark and then stop. Laughter rises from one doorway and slips away into the dark. Someone hums while stirring a pot. Someone tells a child not to run with a stick, a sentence so ordinary and universal that it could belong to any century, which is exactly why it matters. Slavery tried to make every moment exceptional in its cruelty. Daily life kept insisting on being daily life. Children bring a different kind of motion to the quarters. Some have spent the day carrying water, minding younger siblings, shoeing animals, or doing light tasks around the plantation. Others are old enough already to feel the field's demands in their shoulders, but in the evening, for a few moments, they still wriggle with leftover energy. They chase each other around a stump. They draw lines in dust with a stick. They invent games from almost nothing. A corncob becomes a toy. A rag becomes a doll. Childhood under slavery was burdened early, yet it did not vanish. It survived in scraps, in play snatched from fatigue, in imagination making room where no room had been offered. Food comes together slowly, then all at once. The smell of cooking deepens. Cornbread emerges dense and hot, its crust rough under the hand. A pot of peas gives off a gentle earthy steam. Greens smell sharp and good. Sometimes there is fish from a creek, rabbit from a snare, or vegetables from a small garden patch. Plantation rations were often inadequate, and many enslaved families depended on supplementary food sources, especially gardens cultivated in limited personal time. Sweet potatoes, beans, collards, turnips, and squash could stretch the week's survival. The garden was labour, yes, but it was also a form of resourcefulness that restored a bit of choice to the table. You eat seated where space allows, on stools, boxes, the floor, or simply standing for a while before settling down. The first bites are often the quietest. Hunger does not encourage speeches. You feel the food's warmth move through you. Salt, smoke, cornmeal, grease, greens. Simple flavours, deeply valued. Hands reach, pass, break, share. Someone keeps a careful eye on portions so everyone gets something. A mother makes sure the youngest are fed first. An older person receives a little extra broth. These decisions carry moral weight. Even in scarcity, there is order, and that order reveals care. One quirky detail from plantation life recorded in some accounts is the pride people could take in particular cooking methods, especially the way cornbread was baked, or how a stew was seasoned with whatever tiny advantage was available. It sounds small from a distance. It is not small. Taste can preserve memory. A certain way of cooking greens can hold on to family habit better than any record book. Even a pinch of ash for lie hominy or a favoured way of frying cakes can become a quiet marker of belonging. Night draws in around the cabins, and with darkness comes a slight easing of surveillance, though never full safety. Fires glow more brightly as the sky deepens. Smoke lifts through the trees. Insects swarm near warm walls. The smell of pine and damp ground thickens after sundown. In warm months, the night air can feel heavy as cloth. In cooler weather, people crowd nearer the fire, turning hands toward the heat and then away again. Touch matters here. The roughness of a blanket, the polished curve of a wooden spoon, the soft weight of a sleeping child leaning against your side. The quarters are social space as much as shelter. Adults exchange news too small for the planter's world to notice, but large enough to shape real life. Someone is ill. Someone has a sore foot that may worsen. Someone heard a wagon arriving from another county. Someone else is expecting a child. Someone's cousin on a nearby plantation may visit on Sunday if permitted. Such talk forms a local map of feeling and kinship. Under slavery, information is never trivial. Knowing who is hurting, who can help, and who needs warning is part of collective endurance. There are also stories, not grand speeches, usually, but talk told in a measured way while hands remain busy. Tales about tricky animals, family memories, stories with a moral, or with no moral at all except that life is strange and people are ridiculous. Humour runs through these evenings in a dry current. A rooster too foolish to live, a pig smarter than its owner, an overseer whose horse seems to have more sense than he does. Gentle mockery can survive where almost everything else is monitored, because it slips between the cracks of power and leaves people breathing easier. Spiritual life may emerge quietly in this setting too. A phrase from scripture repeated from memory, a low hymn sung while rocking a baby, a whispered prayer over a sick child. Some enslaved people attended supervised services shaped by white authority, while others practiced faith more privately among trusted company. Historians continue to debate the exact balance between imposed religion and autonomous worship on different plantations, because evidence is uneven and often filtered through hostile observers, but there is no doubt that belief, in many forms, lived strongly in the quarters. It offered comfort, judgment against injustice, and a language for endurance. Not every evening is peaceful. Tension lives close to the surface in crowded quarters. Fatigue can sharpen tempers. Grief can sit heavily in a room. A child may cry from hunger or fever. A couple may argue in hushed angry tones. Someone may return hurt, humiliated, or frightened by an encounter during the day. The cabin is not a magical refuge untouched by the plantation's violence. It is a human place, carrying pressure, conflict, tenderness, and weariness all at once. Yet people still make room for beauty. A woman smooths a child's hair before sleep. Someone carves a small object from wood with surprising delicacy. A man tunes his voice against the night and lets a melody settle into the room. Music in the quarters might be lively on some nights, soft on others, or absent when exhaustion has claimed everything. Hand claps, foot taps, humming, and song all had places in enslaved communities. Though the forms and occasions differed widely, some music was for worship, some for pleasure, some for coded feeling difficult to state directly. You notice how darkness changes authority. The big house lamps glow in the distance, but the cabins gather their own life. Here the planter's table is not the centre. Here the important questions are immediate and intimate. Is there enough wood for the night? Can the baby sleep? Will the roof hold if rain comes? Has the sore ankle swollen more? Can one shirt survive another week before mending becomes impossible? Real history often lives inside such questions, not only in laws and markets, but in how ordinary people manage another evening under impossible conditions. The sleeping arrangements begin slowly. A blanket shaken out, cornshuck mattress straightened, children urged to lie down, infants nursed or rocked, fire banked low so some warmth will remain by morning. The cabin shifts from active space to resting space without ever becoming fully still. One person still sews by the last bit of light. Another mutters half asleep. Someone scratches at a mosquito bite with the distracted irritation of long practice. Summer nights in Alabama can bring insects in noisy clouds, and no one mistakes this for hospitality. Privacy is scarce, but intimacy survives in other forms. A hand squeezed in the dark, a quiet sentence shared between partners after the children sleep, a grandmother's voice telling a child to hush now, in a tone shaped by decades of comforting. These moments are easy for formal records to miss. They leave little paper, but they are the true architecture of life in the quarters, not the logs, not the clay, not the nails, the human ties. There is scholarly disagreement over how much enslaved people could personalize their living spaces on specific plantations, because descriptions vary. Some narratives describe swept yards, gardens, handmade furnishings, and decorative touches such as cloth, gourds, or cherished objects. Other evidence emphasizes the harsh instability of housing and the lack of time or materials for anything beyond survival. Both may be true at once. Conditions changed from plantation to plantation, and even from month to month. What does not change is the impulse itself. Given any opening at all, people made space livable. As the fire lowers, the room cools a little. Smoke thins. The smell of food lingers in the wood. Outside, frogs begin their slow night music from damp places near water. A horse stamps once in a distant lot. Wind brushes leaves and then is gone. You lie down with muscles still sore from labour, but the evening has given something the field could not. Within these cramped walls, among worn tools and tired voices, a social world has held together for another night. It is improvised, vulnerable, and constantly threatened, yet undeniably real. Your eyes close while the cabin breathes around you. Someone nearby is already asleep. Someone else is whispering one last sentence into the dark. The earth under the floor holds the day's heat. The blanket against your skin is rough but welcome. Sleep comes not as luxury but as necessity, and within the quarters that necessity is shared by everyone under the roof, for a few hours before another summons from outside. The cabin becomes what the plantation never intended it to be, a place where people gather their strength, guard one another's humanity, and hold fast to life in the most ordinary, essential ways. Morning hunger never really leaves the plantation. It only changes costume. At dawn it is a hollow feeling under the ribs. By midday it becomes a faint dizziness when the heat rises too fast. By evening it returns as a practical question asked over every pot and every scrap of meal. In Alabama in 1840, the struggle for food was not merely about appetite. It was about planning, invention, barter, memory, and the stubborn art of making too little carry you through another day. You begin with what the plantation issues, because that is the foundation whether anyone likes it or not. On many plantations, enslaved people received weekly or monthly rations centered on cornmeal and pork. Sometimes there was molasses, sometimes a little flour, sometimes nothing beyond the plainest allotment, measured with the chilly efficiency of someone feeding labor rather than caring for human beings. The ration could sustain life in the narrowest sense, but it rarely offered comfort, and it often failed to provide enough variety or nourishment for people doing punishing physical work. Cornmeal appears everywhere because it must. It becomes mush, ash cake, hoe cake, pone, dumplings, crusts, and whatever else a skilled cook can coax from it. You learn that texture matters. A thinner mush slips down quickly before work. A firmer cake can be wrapped, carried, and eaten with fingers. A crust baked just right gives a little resistance at the edge and softness inside. These distinctions may sound modest from a comfortable distance, but on the plantation they can decide whether breakfast feels merely necessary or briefly satisfying. Pork, when available, brings salt and fat, both precious. A small strip can flavour a whole pot. Grease saved from frying may be used again and again, turning vegetables or cornmeal into something richer than the ingredients would suggest. Salt pork can be stubbornly hard, smoky, and tough enough to seem personally offended at being cooked, yet no one treats it lightly. Fat means energy, flavour means morale. A spoonful of drippings can change the character of supper more completely than any grand recipe. Still, The ration alone is rarely enough. That is where ingenuity enters, not as a charming extra, but as survival itself. Across the South, enslaved people used every narrow opening available to stretch the food supply. On Alabama plantations, many cultivated garden patches when time and space allowed. A small plot near the cabin might hold collards, mustard greens, sweet potatoes, beans, turnips, onions, peas, or squash. The scale could be tiny, almost insulting in relation to need, yet the patch might stand between bare subsistence and real nourishment. The garden asks for labour in hours already claimed by fatigue. You hoe after fieldwork, you weed at dusk, you carry water when your shoulders would rather collapse, yet the garden belongs, in some fragile sense, to the people tending it. That changes its meaning. These are crops planted not for the planter's profit, but for your own table, your own children, your own small chance at choice. A row of greens can feel almost luxurious under such conditions. Not because it is grand, but because it answers to you. Alabama's climate helps and hinders at the same time. Long warm seasons can produce abundant vegetables, but heat also brings insects, mildew, drought spells, and fast spoilage. A patch thriving one week may droop the next. Sweet potatoes hide their value under the soil until digging time. Beans climb if they can find support. Greens can become tough if cut too late. You learn to read the signs, the yellowing leaf, the split pod, the insect damage on a stem. A person living close to necessity becomes a botanist without ceremony. You smell the garden before you taste it. Crushed tomato leaf has a bitter green scent. Turnip tops smell peppery when torn. Wet soil after evening watering rises rich and cool, a relief from the dust of the field. Pulling onions leaves a sharp sweetness on the hands. Sweet potato vines brush your ankles with their soft drag. The senses keep an inventory long before any written list could. Hunting and fishing also matter where conditions permit. Men and boys, and sometimes women and girls depending on circumstance, use traps, hooks, nets, or simple tools to gather what the plantation does not provide. Fish from creeks, turtles from muddy banks, rabbits from snares, possums, birds, and occasionally deer can supplement the diet. The amount varies widely. Some plantations allowed more freedom to hunt than others. Some owners prefer to benefit from their enslaved workers feeding themselves. Others feared any practice that required weapons, movement, or time outside strict supervision. The rules were inconsistent, which is a favourite hobby of unjust systems. A rabbit caught at the right moment can transform the week. So can a string of fish cleaned by lantern light near a water bucket. The smell of fresh fish is metallic, muddy, and immediate. Scaling it leaves silver flecks sticking to the skin. Rabbit fur feels surprisingly soft when skinning begins, then quickly gives way to the colder work of dressing meat. These tasks are practical and unsentimental, yet they bring the deep satisfaction of having secured something beyond the ration line. Foraging lives in the same world of careful opportunity. Wild berries, nuts, persimmons, pawpaws, plums, herbs, mushrooms, and edible greens may be gathered by people who know where and when to look. Such knowledge is not casual. It is learned through observation, family teaching, and local experience. One patch of blackberries ripens along a fence. Hickory nuts drop near a certain stand of trees. Pokeweed is useful only when very young and properly prepared. Mushrooms are not to be guessed at by fools. Nature can feed you, but it demands respect. There is a quirky tidbit noted in some recollections from enslaved communities across the South. Children were often astonishingly skilled at spotting edible things adults might miss while walking, playing, or doing errands. A handful of berries, a bird's egg, a patch of sorrel, an overlooked nut tree. It sounds almost playful, but it reveals how thoroughly survival trained the eye. Even childhood learned to scan the land for calories. Cooking on the plantation is a masterclass in making flavour from scarcity. You work with iron pots, skillets, open hearths, embers, and very little waste. Greens simmer for a long time with pork scraps or grease. Cornmeal cakes bake against hot ash or on a hoe blade set near coals, giving the bread its famous name. Peas are cooked down until broth thickens and starch softens. Sweet potatoes roast in the embers until their insides turn soft and fragrant. Smoke, salt, earthiness, and char become the great seasonings of necessity. Smell dominates the cabin at mealtime. Wood smoke wraps around everything. Hot cornmeal gives off a gentle toasted scent. Greens smell deep and savoury if they have a bit of fat, sharper and thinner if they do not. Molasses, when available, adds dark sweetness to the air before it even reaches the tongue. Food on a plantation rarely arrives as lavish display. It arrives as steam, as practicality, as relief. The first inhalation over a hot pot can feel almost as important as the first bite. You also learn preservation, because food that spoils is a disaster. Salted meat keeps longer, corn can be dried and ground, beans can be shelled and stored, sweet potatoes may be banked carefully, herbs can hang from rafters to dry. In some places, fruit is preserved as best as conditions allow, though sugar is not always easy to spare. Smokehouses, if accessible, become part of the food landscape, carrying the heavy cured smell of meat and thyme. Not everyone has equal access to those stored goods, of course. Plantation hierarchy has a way of showing up in every pantry. Barter adds another layer to daily survival. Enslaved people sometimes exchanged food, labour, or handmade goods among themselves, or, in certain circumstances, with poor whites, peddlers, or local markets. Eggs from a few chickens, extra greens, a basket woven in scarce free time, a bit of sewing or repair. The legal and practical boundaries of this trade varied greatly, and scholars still debate how extensive it was on specific plantations in Alabama at this date. Some records suggest active informal economies. Others show tighter restrictions. Yet wherever there was even slight room to maneuver, people often used it. Imagine the careful calculations involved. Should a few eggs be eaten in the cabin or traded for coffee? Should extra peas be dried for later or swapped for thread? Should a chicken be kept for breeding or cooked for a special occasion? None of these choices are minor when the margin between enough and not enough is so thin. Food decisions become financial decisions, family decisions, emotional decisions. One roasted sweet potato on a difficult evening can be both supper and comfort. Children experience hunger with particular intensity. Their bodies are growing. Their patience is short. A child may ask for more before there is more to give. That simple request can weigh heavily on any adult in the room. Mothers, grandmothers, fathers, older siblings, and neighbours all become managers of appetite and fairness. A crust is divided carefully. A spoon is tilted so broth reaches the smallest mouth. A piece of meat is reserved for the one recovering from fever. These acts of distribution reveal an ethics deeper than any plantation rule book. Pregnant women, nursing mothers, the elderly, and the sick had nutritional needs the plantation rarely respected. A woman carrying a child might be expected to work hard while living on inadequate fare. Someone ill could need broth, soft food, or fresh vegetables not easily obtained. This is one reason gardens and supplemental food mattered so much. They were not merely pleasant additions. They could protect health in a system structurally indifferent to it. Sometimes food becomes celebration, even under constraint. A holiday, a wedding, a naming, the end of a harvest task, a rare visit from distant kin. On such occasions the meal may be fuller, more varied, more lovingly arranged. Chicken, fish, pies, if ingredients can be found, roasted vegetables, cakes sweetened more generously than usual. Laughter rises differently around a special meal. People sit longer if allowed. Stories expand. For a short span, the table feels abundant not because it rivals the planters, but because it gathers community around hard-won plenty. At other times the table reflects loss. Drought reduces the garden. A trap comes up empty. Someone steals from the patch because their own children are hungry. A ration is cut or delayed. Illness keeps a gardener from tending crucial rows. Hunger then sharpens not only the body but the temper of a whole household. The cabin grows quieter. People eat faster. Hope becomes practical and narrow. Just make it through the week. Just get to the next distribution. Just let the sweet potatoes hold out. There is scholarly uncertainty about the exact caloric adequacy of rations on different Alabama plantations in 1840, because surviving records can be misleading. Owners sometimes wrote what was allotted, not what was actually received. and conditions changed with weather, debt, local prices, and the temperament of those in charge. Formerly enslaved people's recollections often emphasize chronic insufficiency, supplemented through personal effort and communal sharing. The paper trail and the lived trail do not always match. Hunger tends to leave stronger marks on the body than in the ledger. One of the most telling things about plantation food is how much knowledge lived outside official power. The planter might own the smokehouse, the corn crib, the hogs, the land, and the ration scale. But he did not necessarily know how to season greens properly, how to nurse a weak garden through bad weather, how to spot the best fishing bend, or how to make a pot stretch to feed one more hungry child. That intelligence lived in the quarters, in hands and memories and repeated trial. It was practical brilliance hidden inside plain work. Even the act of eating carries atmosphere. The scrape of a wooden spoon against an iron pot, the crackle of fire settling into coals, the rough feel of cornbread broken open in the fingers, steam rising into a dim cabin, a child licking molasses from a thumb with complete seriousness, someone blowing on hot peas and then laughing softly at their own impatience. These are ordinary moments, yet under slavery they become precious because ordinary life itself is under threat. You come to understand that food on the plantation is never just food. It is labour turned into nourishment by skill. It is care disguised as portioning. It is memory held in seasoning. It is planning shaped by fear of shortage. It is the garden after sundown, the creek at dawn, the rabbit snare checked quietly, the beans shelled by tired hands, the shared plate, the saved crust, the spoon passed to a child. The system around you tries to reduce people to labouring bodies. Feeding one another insists on something larger. It insists that bodies deserve tending, that taste deserves attention, and that life is more than bare survival. Even when bare survival is the daily fight, love on an Alabama plantation in 1840 lives under permanent interruption. It is real, deep, ordinary, and constantly threatened by other people's decisions. You do not need a dramatic speech to understand this. You see it in the way a mother checks a child's face before first light, as if memorizing it. You hear it in the careful tone between partners speaking after dark, when every word must pass through fatigue and worry before it can rest. You feel it in the sudden hush that falls over a cabin when news arrives from the road. Family under slavery is never a simple household picture. It is a web of bonds stretched across cabins, neighbouring plantations, distant counties, and painful absences. A child may live with parents, or with one parent and grandparents, or with unrelated adults who become kin through necessity and care. A husband and wife may be allowed to live together, or may belong to different owners and see each other only at night or on Sundays if distance and permission allow. Brothers and sisters may grow up side by side for years and then vanish into the domestic slave trade in separate directions. Affection is steady. Circumstance is cruelly unstable. You wake to the sounds of family before you think about the word itself. A baby fussing in the dark, a grandmother clearing her throat by the fire, a boy whispering that he cannot find his other shoe, a mother telling him to look again. No, not there. Look near the bed frame. Those little sounds create the shape of belonging. They are the music of daily intimacy. On a plantation, that intimacy is never secure. Perhaps that is why it can feel so sharp. Marriage among enslaved people carried emotional and communal significance, even when the law refused to honour it. Couples formed unions recognised by family, neighbours, and often by spiritual custom. Some jumped the broom in ceremonies remembered across generations. Others simply agreed before witnesses, with whatever dignity could be made from the moment. The plantation could not legally respect such bonds in the way free marriage was recognised. Yet the people living those bonds certainly did. Their commitment did not depend on paperwork. It depended on devotion, resilience, and repeated choice under pressure. There is a bitter absurdity here. A system claiming total authority over people still had to watch them love one another in ways it could not fully control. It could punish, sell, divide, and intrude, but it could not make attachment disappear. That must have been irritating for the slaveholder class, which is one of the few small comforts history occasionally offers. Parenting under slavery requires vigilance beyond the usual burdens of care. A mother feeds, washes, soothes, teaches, and warns, all while managing labour demands that may pull her into the field before sunrise. A father may work nearby, or at a distance, or under a different owner altogether. Grandparents often play essential roles, carrying stories, discipline, tenderness, and practical knowledge into the next generation. Older siblings take on astonishing responsibility. A girl barely in her teens may quiet a baby, braid hair, stir a pot, and guide a younger child through the yard with the competence of someone much older. You teach children very early how to move safely through plantation life. Do not linger where you are not supposed to linger. Do not speak carelessly in front of certain people. Watch the animals. Watch the road. Stay close when told. Mind the fire. Keep quiet now. Run later. Childhood still exists, but it is hemmed in by warnings. Even games can carry lessons. A child learns to notice moods, to read distance, to understand when adults are frightened even if no one says so directly. The fear of sale hangs over family life like weather that never fully clears. It may not strike every day, but it is always present in the air. A debt, a death, a failed crop, a business decision, a planter's whim, a trader arriving unexpectedly. Any of these can break a household apart. The domestic slave trade into the Deep South had already carried many enslaved people from Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas into Alabama by 1840, leaving behind parents, children, spouses, and siblings. And that wider history lives inside every rumour of sale. People know exactly what it can mean because many are already survivors of earlier separations. You can feel that fear in small habits. A mother may tell a child the names of relatives over and over so they will be remembered. A parent may repeat where kin once lived, which road led there, which county line mattered, which river crossing marked the way. Names become heirlooms. So do stories. If papers will not preserve your family properly, memory must do the work itself. Some families try to keep a few precious objects: a cloth, a Bible if one can be had, a carved token, a ribbon, a cooking pot associated with a mother or grandmother. Such items are not merely possessions. They are anchors for identity. A child touching the same blanket used by an older sibling. A woman wearing beads or cloth passed down in some fashion. A man keeping a tool shaped by his father's hands. Material culture on plantations could be painfully limited, yet even a single object might hold an entire emotional landscape. News of family on nearby plantations travels through visiting work routes, market trips, hired-out labour, church gatherings, and sheer persistence. People pass messages with extraordinary care. Tell my sister the baby is well. Tell him I'm still here. Tell mother I heard about the fever. Tell them not to worry, which of course means everyone will worry terribly, but at least the message carries love. Communication is precious because uncertainty is exhausting. Not knowing where your people are can wear on the mind as steadily as hunger wears on the body. Sunday visits, when allowed, become charged with feeling. A husband walking miles after the week's labour to see his wife and children on another plantation. A mother waiting for news of a son hired out nearby. A grandmother receiving a visit from grandchildren who are growing too quickly under someone else's roof. These reunions are never casual. Time is short. The road back always waits. Yet within those brief meetings there can be food shared, hair braided, clothes mended, babies admired, and stories exchanged. Tenderness becomes compressed, intense, practical. There is a sensory world to family life often missing from formal records. The smell of lye soap on a child just washed. The warmth of a small hand tucked into a larger one. The scratchy feel of homespun fabric while a mother pulls a shirt over a restless head. A father's calloused palm resting carefully on an infant's back. The sound of a grandmother's voice telling a story low by the fire. These details matter because slavery worked constantly to turn people into units of labour. Family restored texture to personhood. Children also receive culture through family, not just care. They learn songs, prayers, sayings, jokes, manners, food ways, gardening skills, herbal remedies, and ways of reading human character. A child watching an elder identify a healing plant near the edge of the yard is learning more than botany. The child is learning continuity. A girl listening to women discuss childbirth, cooking, or weather signs absorbs a body of knowledge rarely written down. A boy following older men repairing a fence or setting a trap learns technique and social memory at once. Families transmit skill as quietly as they transmit affection. One quirky but revealing detail from some recollections of plantation childhood is how often adults used humour to teach difficult lessons. A warning might come disguised as a funny story. A stern instruction might be softened with teasing. A child could be corrected through laughter before danger required a sharper tone. Humour did not erase the seriousness of the world. It helped children bear it without being crushed too quickly. At the same time, family life could be strained by the very pressures meant to break it. Exhaustion leaves less patience. Scarcity causes conflict. A father who cannot protect his children from sale or punishment may carry a grief that hardens into silence. A mother working through pregnancy, illness, or bereavement may have little energy left for gentleness. Older children burdened with adult duties may resent it, then feel guilty for resenting it. The plantation is not content with stealing labour. It steals ease from relationships too. Still, care persists. A mother wakes before dawn to patch a child's shirt. A father carves a toy from scrap wood. A grandmother saves the tenderest part of the meal for someone with a cough. An auntie who's not literally an aunt becomes indispensable anyway, because kinship in the quarters often expands beyond blood. Fictive kin, as scholars sometimes call them, could provide practical and emotional support where biological family had been fractured. The term is useful academically, though from inside the cabin there is nothing fictive about the person who fed you, held you, or taught you how to survive. Historians continue to debate how much stability enslaved family life could achieve on particular plantations, since records vary so widely, and slaveholders often exaggerated their own benevolence. Some plantations allowed relatively more consistent family residence. Others disrupted households repeatedly through sale, hiring out, punishment, or labour demands. Formerly enslaved people's testimonies often reveal both facts at once: powerful family attachment and constant structural danger. The love was real, the protection was not. Childbirth brings both joy and fear into this world. A new baby means continuity, hope, and delight. It also means vulnerability for mother and child. Enslaved women often relied on midwives, elder women, and community networks for support. Knowledge of birthing practices, remedies, and postpartum care circulated among black women with remarkable strength, yet recovery time could be short, medical aid uneven or self-interested, and infant mortality painfully familiar. A birth on the plantation was never only a private event. It happened in the shadow of a market that counted children as future property. Naming a child carries special power under such conditions. A name can honour kin, preserve memory, express faith, or quietly assert personhood against ownership. Sometimes a child is named for a grandparent lost to sale, sometimes for a father living elsewhere, sometimes for a biblical figure, sometimes for someone admired in the local world. Names travel even when bodies are forced apart. They become threads that cannot easily be cut. The possibility of forced separation shapes even the happiest domestic scenes. A toddler asleep with one fist still closed around a wooden spoon. Sisters laughing while shelling peas. A young couple sharing a private smile over the baby's stubborn curls. All of it is touched by the knowledge that tomorrow could alter the household permanently. This awareness does not make love weaker. It often makes it fiercer, more deliberate, more attentive to memory. When evening settles and the cabin quiets, family becomes most visible in its gentlest forms. Someone wraps a child in a blanket. Someone whispers a prayer over sleeping heads. Someone repeats the family names once more, maybe aloud, maybe only inside. The room smells of smoke, bodies, and clean earth tracked in from the yard. Firelight touches tired faces and softens them. Outside, the plantation still stands with all its rules and threats. Inside, people continue the oldest work there is, keeping one another human. That work does not always look heroic. It may be a lullaby sung while stirring mush. It may be a stern glance that sends a child away from danger. It may be a pair of hands unbraiding hair at night. It may be a memory carefully planted in a young mind so it can survive a future separation. Family on an Alabama plantation in 1840 is built from such acts. Not secure, not protected, not recognized properly by law, but built all the same. And every time a parent teaches, comforts, names, remembers, or reaches for a child in the dark, the plantation's claim to own the whole of life is quietly proven false. Sunday arrives with a different texture, and people feel it before they name it. The air in the quarters seems to loosen a little. The pace of footsteps changes. Voices rise later in the morning, sometimes softer, sometimes brighter, depending on the plantation, the season, and the demand still hanging over the day. Rest under slavery is never complete. There may still be chores, washing, mending, gardening, cooking, or extra labour ordered by someone with too much authority and too little conscience. Even so, Sunday can open a narrow space where the spirit has room to breathe. You wake without the immediate shove of field rhythm, and that alone alters the body. The cabin sounds different. A child is not being hurried into clothes quite so fast. Someone sits a little longer by the fire. A pot bubbles in a less frantic way. Outside, the yard carries a calmer shuffle instead of the hard, purposeful movement of workdays. Chickens scratch where they please. Smoke drifts up in lazy columns. The sun warms the roofs and fence posts with a gentler sort of insistence. On many plantations, enslaved people were allowed some portion of Sunday for themselves, though what that meant in practice varied widely. Some owners encouraged attendance at supervised worship, believing religion could be used to preach obedience. Others allowed informal gatherings if order seemed preserved. Many simply expected people to use the day to handle all the domestic work impossible during the week. Historians still debate how much true leisure Sunday provided on different plantations, because the evidence is uneven and often filtered through people eager to present slavery as softer than it was. What remains clear is that any available hour became precious. You can smell that difference in the air: soap made from lion fat, damp cloth hung out after washing, freshly turned earth in a small garden patch, pine smoke from cooking fires. Sometimes there is the faint sweetness of a cake made for a special gathering, or the richer scent of chicken or fish if someone has managed to prepare a better meal. Clean clothes, even rough ones, carry their own special dignity. Fabric scrubbed and rinsed by hard labour feels cooler against the skin, and for a brief time it smells of water, ash soap, and sunlight rather than sweat. Sunday is often the day for putting yourself back together. Shirts are mended, head wraps are tied with extra care. Children's faces are washed thoroughly, ears included whether they approve or not. Hair is combed, parted, braided, or wrapped. These acts are practical, but they are also ceremonial in a quiet way. To make yourself neat when the world profits from your exhaustion is a statement of self-respect. It says you're not only a labouring body, you are a person who deserves order, beauty, and preparation. The social life of the quarters expands on such a day. People who are too busy for much conversation during the week can speak at greater length. News travels. Laughter has time to land properly. A man may visit his wife on a neighbouring plantation if distance and permission allow. Children drift between doorways carrying bits of gossip they only half understand. Elders sit where they can see the yard and weigh everything with experienced eyes. The plantation still surrounds all of this, but for a few hours the cabins feel less like isolated units and more like a community in motion. Then there is worship, which can take many forms. On some plantations, people are led to a formal service under white supervision. A preacher may speak from a Bible while owners or overseers listen for signs of doctrine that support discipline. Obedience, humility, patience, and reward in heaven are emphasized with suspicious enthusiasm. There is usually no mystery about why. Religion, in the hands of power, often develops a sudden passion for order, yet faith does not belong entirely to those trying to manage it. Black worship under slavery holds its own currents, deep and persistent. Even in supervised services, listeners can hear more than the speaker intends. Stories of exodus, judgment, deliverance, and divine justice carry meanings that cannot be fenced in neatly. Moses does not become less interesting because a planter wishes he would. Pharaoh remains a difficult character to mention innocently. In other settings, worship happens more privately among trusted people. A cabin cleared a little after supper, a yard gathering at dusk, a brush arbour in the woods where branches have been bent to make a hidden shelter. People sing softly at first, then more fully. A prayer is spoken. Someone testifies in a low voice about hardship, endurance, or gratitude. Another person answers with a murmur of agreement. The sound builds not by performance, but by shared feeling. In these moments, spiritual life becomes communal strength. The music matters enormously. Spiritual songs carry layered meaning through rhythm, repetition, and emotion. Some are plaintive and slow, a kind of breathing through sorrow. Others rise and sway with more energy, gathering the body into the act of belief. Clapping hands, tapping feet, and rocking shoulders can create a pulse that seems to move through the floorboards or the ground itself. You feel worship in the skin as much as in the ear. The sound of several voices joining on one line can make a cabin feel larger than its walls. There is no single pattern to black religious practice in Alabama in 1840. Some enslaved people embraced Christianity deeply. Others blended Christian teaching with older African-rooted understandings, folk practices, healing traditions, and local customs. Some kept a guarded distance from formal religion while still participating in prayers, songs, or communal rituals. Scholars continue to disagree about how clearly certain African continuities can be traced in every region, because the documentation is fragmentary and often distorted by hostile observers. But no serious reading of slave life misses this truth. Spiritual expression was flexible, creative, and central. You see it in the details. A woman closes her eyes while a hymn rises and presses one hand over her heart. A man bows his head and speaks a prayer so plain and direct, it lands harder than a polished sermon. A child, half sleepy, leans against an elder's side while the singing goes on above. Someone wipes tears without embarrassment. Another person smiles suddenly at a line that promises justice beyond the plantation's reach. Faith here is not decorative. It is used. Religious gatherings also offer something beyond doctrine. They allow emotion to circulate safely, or as safely as possible. Grief can be named. Fear can be shared without being explained to those outside the community. Hope can be rehearsed aloud until it feels a little more substantial. Under slavery, where much of daily life depends on caution and controlled speech, worship gives room for fuller feeling. That release matters. A person cannot live forever with every thought tied tight. There is a quirky and revealing detail in many descriptions of enslaved worship across the South. The adults were not the only attentive participants. Children often absorbed songs and prayers with astonishing speed, humming them while playing or repeating phrases with solemn little faces that made everyone laugh gently. Faith entered the community not only through sermons but through rhythm, memory, and imitation. A melody learned on Sunday might follow a child all week, like a hidden ember. Sunday can also bring rites of passage and social recognition. A couple's union may be acknowledged before friends and kin. A newborn may be prayed over. Someone recovering from illness may receive special attention. An elder known for wisdom may lead a prayer or settle a disagreement. Community authority operates here in ways the plantation does not officially sanction, but cannot entirely erase. Respect is earned through age, steadiness, kindness, healing knowledge, moral force, or sheer reliability over time, and there is joy. This is important. Black religious life under slavery is not only sorrow made musical. It can hold genuine delight, laughter, and relief. A line of a song may spark smiles across a room. Someone may clap a beat with unexpected flair. A prayer may include a little side glance at human foolishness that makes a few listeners suppress grins. Spiritual life is serious, but seriousness does not forbid humour. Sometimes humour keeps seriousness from hardening into despair. Outside formal worship, Sunday still has its sacred textures, a grandmother teaching a child to recite a verse, a mother brushing lint from a shirt before a gathering, a man sitting quietly under a tree after prayer, letting the wind move over his face as if peace might sink in through the skin, a woman tending herbs with the same concentration she gives to devotion. The line between spiritual and practical life is not always sharp. Healing plants, moral stories, burial customs, naming traditions, and respect for elders can all exist inside a worldview that joins body, memory, and soul. Of course, surveillance never fully disappears. People may lower their voices if they suspect listening ears. Meetings can be broken up or restricted. Preaching that sounds too much like freedom may invite punishment. Songs can be tolerated one day and criticized the next. White observers often misunderstood or deliberately minimized what they saw, treating powerful communal worship as childish excitement or harmless emotion. They noticed the volume and missed the meaning. That was convenient for them, though not especially intelligent. Even under these limits, prayer can become a form of inner resistance. To believe that no human owner holds ultimate authority is already to place the plantation in a smaller moral frame. To imagine judgment on the oppressor is to deny his permanence. To sing of crossing over deliverance onto our home can carry meanings broader than the surface words. Not every song is a code, and not every prayer hides a political plan. Still, the language of faith often provides shelter for truths otherwise dangerous to speak plainly. Sunday gatherings may end with shared food, long conversation, and practical exchange. Someone asks about a sick relative, someone seeks advice for a marriage strain, someone borrows thread, someone passes along herb knowledge for a fever. Worship and mutual aid are not separate departments. They belong to the same world of care. The spirit is strengthened, yes, but so is the network that helps people survive the ordinary wounds of plantation life. As daylight softens, the mood can turn quieter, children grow drowsy, songs slow, smoke from evening fires drifts through the trees, the smell of cooked peas, cornbread, and wood ash mingles with the warmth of sun-baked earth. Hands that clapped in rhythm now fold laundry or cradle babies. A Bible, if there is one, is wrapped and put away carefully. A bench is returned to its place. The sacred has lived inside the ordinary all day and now settles back into it. There is uncertainty among historians about the exact relationship between organized black churches and plantation worship in Alabama. By 1840, especially in rural areas where travel, white oversight, and geography shaped what was possible. Some enslaved people had contact with Baptist or Methodist structures. Others worshipped mainly in informal gatherings. The boundaries shifted constantly. But the larger point does not depend on perfect records. Spiritual community existed wherever people carried songs, scripture, prayer, memory, and hope into shared space. Night comes on and the cabins glow again with small fires and tired voices. The plantation has not changed, no law has lifted, no field has vanished. Yet something within the people has been tended. Sunday has offered not complete rest, but restoration of another kind. In song, prayer, testimony, washing, visiting, and simple presence, the soul has been reminded that it is larger than the day's commands. You lie down with the echoes of voices still in your ears. Maybe a hymn line repeats softly in your mind. Maybe a prayer spoken over the community settles in the chest like warmth. Maybe what remains is not any single word, but the feeling of being held for a while inside something wider than fear. That feeling matters. On an Alabama plantation in 1840, it may not stop the next day's labor, but it helps carry a person into it with dignity still alive, and with a strength no overseer can measure properly. The body keeps a record that no plantation ledger can read properly. Every season writes on the skin. Every task leaves its small signature on muscle, joint, and breath. In Alabama in 1840, daily life on a plantation is not only shaped by work and authority, but by weather, clothing, insects, mud, sun, dampness, and the endless negotiation between the human body and the land forced upon it. You wake inside that negotiation and carry it with you all day, whether the air is thick as warm soup or sharp enough in winter dawn to sting the lungs. Clothing is the first argument of the morning. The shirt or dress issued to you may be coarse homespun, often made from rough woolen or cotton fabric depending on the season and the plantation's provisions. It scratches at the neck, it rubs under the arms. Seams can harden with sweat and dirt until they feel almost like rope against the skin. Trousers hang stiffly, dresses snag on splinters and brush, A head wrap, kerchief, or hat may offer some protection from sun or cold, but it never solves everything. Fabric helps and annoys at the same time, which is a very plantation sort of arrangement. Plantation records sometimes list annual clothing distributions with an air of self-congratulations, as if handing out a few garments somehow balances forced labour. In reality, allowances could be inadequate, late, poorly fitted, or already wearing thin before the season changed. Children outgrew items quickly. Adults patched what they could. A tear at the hem became a bigger tear. Elbows wore through, knees frayed. Cuffs darkened and stiffened with repeated work. Needle and thread mattered because fabric rarely lasted as long as need. You feel clothing most clearly where it fails. A loose shoe rubs the heel raw. A missing button lets cold air in. A wet hem slaps against the shin all morning after crossing dew-heavy grass. If shoes are scarce, as they often are, the feet meet the ground directly. Packed dirt, stubble, pebbles, splinters, thorns, hot dust, and winter frost all become intimate companions. Bare feet toughen, but toughness is not immunity. A thorn still finds flesh. A hidden shard still cuts. Mud still sucks at the toes with insulting enthusiasm. There is a sensory reality to feet on a plantation that polite histories tend to skip. Damp ground can feel cool and forgiving at dawn, then turn slick and stubborn under rain, then bake hard by afternoon. In summer, dust coats the ankles in a pale film. In winter, cold clay clings like heavy paste. The body learns each texture by touch. Feet widen, toughen, crack, and adapt. They also ache constantly. Summer in Alabama can feel almost personal in its hostility. Heat arrives early and stays late. The air grows dense enough to seem chewable. Sweat begins before real labour and continues until clothing sticks to the back and chest like a second hide. Cotton fields reflect sunlight upward. Pine woods hold warmth in their stillness. The body loses water fast. Salt dries white at the seams of cloth. Skin under collars and waistbands becomes rubbed, reddened, and sore. Even breathing can feel like work when noon settles over the land. Then come the insects, who are not invited and never care. Mosquitoes rise from wet places at dawn and evening in whining little clouds. Gnats hover near eyes, mouth, and nose with maddening persistence. Flies find sweat instantly. Horseflies bite with a blunt, cruel purpose that makes the whole arm jerk. Fleas and lice may thrive in cramped quarters, bedding, and clothing worn hard between thorough washings. Bedbugs turn night into a scratchy negotiation. The plantation offers enough discomfort already, but nature likes to add commentary. People respond with whatever means they have. Smoke helps drive insects away for a time. Grease, certain herbs, or coverings may offer some relief. Sleeves are pulled down when possible. Hands slap without pausing the work too long. A child may be rubbed with a remedy taught by an elder. Knowledge of insect seasons, swamp edges, and breezier spots becomes part of bodily survival. None of it is perfect. The mosquitoes remain deeply unconvinced by human preference. Skin tells the story most openly. Sun darkens and toughens what it can. Backs of hands grow rough. Lips crack in wind or heat. Ankles collect scratches from weeds and brush. Shoulders carry marks from sacks, poles, or repeated strain. A blister on the palm hardens into a callus, then splits again under pressure. Small wounds can become serious if dirt, sweat, and continued labour prevent healing. A scrape that might be trivial in easier circumstances becomes a constant sting when every movement reopens it. There are also the hidden pains. The lower back that tightens every morning before loosening reluctantly. The knee that clicks while squatting. The shoulder that burns after hoeing or lifting. Women carry these burdens while also managing pregnancy, nursing, menstruation, and domestic labour. The sentimental plantation myth prefers women in tidy dresses near porches. The real Alabama plantation puts them in fields, kitchens, cabins, and yards, carrying weight in every sense. Their bodies are expected to endure without complaint, which is one of many reasons complaint becomes such a necessary private art. Men's bodies are no less monitored, no less exploited, but often judged by visible strength and output in punishing ways. A strong back becomes a resource to be spent. Broad shoulders attract harder tasks. Injury may reduce status in the eyes of those in power while increasing fear for the future. Under slavery, physical capacity is not simply a fact of health. It is a category that determines labour, punishment, expectation, and value in the market's cold imagination. Children's bodies reveal the plantation's demands in another register. Bare legs scratched by brush, thin wrists, bellies sometimes distended by poor diet, feet already hardened, hair dried by sun and dust. Yet children also move with quickness adults may envy, darting through yards, balancing on fences, climbing when they should not, recovering faster from some discomforts while remaining vulnerable to illness and hunger in others. A child can be lively and undernourished at the same time. The plantation has room for that contradiction. Unfortunately, winter in Alabama is shorter than farther north, but it should not be mistaken for harmless. Damp cold can work into the bones with surprising force. Cabins leak drafts through chinks and floorboards. Morning air bites at wet skin. Thin blankets fail to hold enough heat. A cold rain can be worse than frost because it soaks cloth and then lingers. Hands stiffen around tools. Bare feet go numb on frozen ground. Smoke from the hearth helps, but only while you're near it. Once outside, the body must fend for itself again. The smell of winter is different too. Less green, more smoke. Wet wool if such cloth is issued. Mud with a mineral sharpness. Cold iron. Damp wood trying to catch fire. Breath turns visible on the darkest mornings. Fingers are held toward coals and then pulled back quickly because chores wait and warmth cannot be hoarded. A person comes to appreciate simple heat with a seriousness that luxurious people rarely understand. Rain changes everything. A light rain may cool the skin and soften the day briefly, though it complicates work. A hard rain transforms paths into slick trenches and fields into clinging muck. Skirts grow heavy at the hem. Trousers collect mud to the knee. Shoes, if present, are soaked through. Feet wrinkle and chill. Cabin roofs drip in the wrong places. Bedding must be protected as best as possible. The smell of wet earth becomes overwhelming, mixed with rot, leaves, smoke, and wool. Rain on a plantation is not scenery. It is a condition the body must solve. And then there is sickness, which threads through all seasons. Colds, fevers, stomach illnesses, respiratory trouble, infected wounds, tooth pain, headaches, and exhaustion are constant companions in many enslaved communities. Alabama's lowlands could also expose people to mosquito-borne disease, including malaria, especially in wetter regions. Illness does not arrive politely. It enters the cabin, settles into a child, weakens an elder, or takes hold of a labourer who's still expected to function until failing becomes undeniable. The body becomes both tool and battlefield. Enslaved people often relied on a mixture of communal care, herbal knowledge, midwifery, practical nursing, and whatever medical attention an owner chose to provide. Black healers, especially women, held deep knowledge of poultices, teas, roots, salves, and techniques for easing pain or fever. Sassafras, willow, camphor, mint, turpentine, onion, and countless other remedies circulated through local practice, though the exact combinations varied widely. Historians continue to debate how much African medicinal knowledge remained distinct in specific parts of the Deep South by 1840, because practices had already blended across generations and regions. What is certain is that care often lived closest to the people who needed it. Touch becomes crucial in such moments. A cool rag placed on a forehead, a hand feeling for fever, fingers massaging a cramped calf, grease rubbed into dry skin, hair braided gently away from a sick face. The body under slavery is constantly used, measured, and disciplined. But among kin and neighbours it is also tended. That difference matters more than any plantation inventory can show. One surprisingly vivid detail from old recollections of labouring life in the South is how much people noticed the smell of one another's work at day's end. Cotton dust, smoke, sweat dried sharp on cloth, mud from a low field, the green scent of crushed vines. It sounds unromantic, and it is, but it is also intimate. You know where a person has been by the air around them. The body becomes a map of the day's environment. There is scholarly uncertainty about the exact quality and quantity of clothing issued on specific Alabama plantations in 1840, because surviving account books often present ideal distributions rather than actual practice. Owners might record what should have been provided, not what was received in usable form. Formerly enslaved people often recalled chronic shortages, poor fit, and heavy dependence on mending. The gap between paper provision and lived condition was one of slavery's favourite tricks. On paper, a person might seem supplied. In reality, the shirt still scratched, the shoe still split, and the child still shivered. Despite all of this, people developed styles of bodily presentation that preserve dignity. A head wrap folded just so, a shirt washed carefully and worn clean on Sunday, hair plaited neatly, a posture held upright despite fatigue. Ornament might be minimal, but order itself becomes expressive. The body is not merely something the plantation uses, it is still a self, and selfhood insists on appearing where it can. You notice, too, that bodies speak socially. The stoop of an elder means one thing. The careful walk of a pregnant woman means another. The stiff arm of someone hiding pain sends a quiet signal to those who know how to read it. Children can identify who is ill, who is overworked, who is recovering, who is grieving simply by movement. In a world where direct speech is sometimes dangerous, the body becomes another language. By night, weariness settles like weight poured into the limbs. Muscles throb, skin itches from bites and dried sweat. Feet pulse against the floorboards or pallet. A shoulder seeks a cooler patch of blanket. Someone scratches at the edge of a mosquito welt with sleepy irritation. The cabin is full of tired bodies, each carrying its own map of weather and work. Outside, the Alabama night hums with frogs, insects, and the soft movement of leaves. Inside, human breath rises and falls in uneven rhythms. The plantation depends on bodies but never truly honours them. It counts their output, prices their strength, and notes their breakdowns without understanding the full humanity contained in each aching frame. Yet the people themselves understand. They wash wounds, mend clothes, share remedies, protect children from cold, shade infants from sun, and remark with dry admiration when someone keeps going through conditions that would flatten a lesser soul. Daily life in Alabama's plantations is written on the body in heat rash, callus, damp hems, sore knees, and braided hair. It is also written in endurance, in care, and in the quiet refusal to let physical hardship erase personhood. On an Alabama plantation, survival often depends on noticing the things you're not supposed to notice. The tone in an overseer's voice before he is fully angry, the way a horse is saddled when someone plans to ride farther than the field edge, the look exchanged at the big house door when debt, sale, or discipline is being discussed. You live in a world crowded with rules, spoken and unspoken, and you learn very quickly that paying attention is not a personality trait. It is protection. The plantation likes order, it likes lines, schedules, permissions, passes, and boundaries. It likes to say where you may stand, when you may move, how long you may speak, and whom you may visit. It tells itself that this is civilization, which is a charming illusion for a system built on theft. But for the people forced to live inside it, rules are not abstract. They are physical. A rule can take the form of a locked gate, a watchful eye, a curfew, a distance too risky to cross after dark, or a punishment everyone has learned to fear without needing it described again. You wake each day into that atmosphere of watchfulness. Even before labour begins, choices are being measured: how quickly you dress, how directly you answer, whether a glance lasts a moment too long, whether laughter carries farther than it should. Enslaved people often had to read authority not only in words but in posture, silence, and routine. A morning that feels slightly off may require extra caution. A quiet yard can be more dangerous than a noisy one if the wrong sort of listening is taking place. This constant alertness shapes the mind. You begin to sort the world into layers. There is what can be said openly. There is what can be said only among trusted people. There is what should be hinted at rather than stated, and there is what must remain unspoken altogether, living in gesture, glance, timing, or memory. That is not deception in any shallow sense. It is intelligence sharpened by pressure. Children learn this too, often earlier than any child should. They are taught not to repeat everything they hear. They learn which adults are safe to approach and which are best avoided. They come to recognize the difference between ordinary irritation and real danger in a grown person's face. A child may fall silent the instant a stranger enters the yard. That silence is learned. It is also heartbreaking. The rules of movement are especially heavy. To leave the plantation without permission may bring severe punishment. Visiting family on another plantation, going to a nearby road, slipping into the woods, or lingering too long on an errand can all become risky depending on local control. Some enslaved people carried passes when sent on tasks. Others moved only under direct supervision. Yet the boundaries were never absolute in practice. People found ways to stretch time, to deliver messages, to make brief visits, to gather news, to breathe outside the tightest circle of surveillance when opportunity appeared. The road becomes a complicated symbol in such a world. It can bring traders, patrollers, debt collectors, and strangers with power over your life. It can also carry kin, news, rumour, and possibility. You listen for wagons because they may matter. You notice hoofbeats because the identity of the rider may matter even more. A road is never only a road when your freedom of movement has been stolen. It is a nerve running through the plantation. Patrols and local white monitoring add another layer of fear beyond the plantation itself. In many parts of the slave South, enslaved people moving at night or away from home ground risked being stopped, questioned, whipped, jailed, or worse. Alabama had laws regulating slave movement and assembly, and enforcement could depend on local customs, county vigilance, and the personalities of men who enjoyed small authority far too much. Historians still debate the consistency of patrol activity across different rural regions, because records vary and enforcement was uneven. But nobody living under slavery needed a perfect legal chart to understand the danger of being caught where you were not allowed to be. So people develop methods of caution. You choose trusted times, trusted routes, trusted companions. You send a child with a message only if the path is familiar and the reason plausible. You listen before entering certain spaces. You let one person speak while another keeps watch. You avoid attracting notice unless notice is unavoidable. Such habits become second nature, as automatic as checking weather. Within that careful world, resistance takes many forms. Some are small enough to pass beneath the planter's understanding, working a bit slower when the chance appears, protecting a sick person's pace by quietly helping with a task, hiding weariness behind skill so it cannot be used against you, saving seed from a garden patch, keeping family ties alive across forbidden distance, holding on to names, songs, beliefs, and knowledge in a system built to strip them away. None of this fits the dramatic picture some people expect when they hear the word resistance. But daily preservation is resistance. It denies the plantation total victory. Then there are bolder acts of feigning illness, breaking a tool, misunderstanding an order on purpose, taking food from the master's stores, concealing a book or learning letters in secret, meeting after dark, passing information, aiding someone who plans to run. Not everyone can risk such actions, and not every attempt succeeds. The danger is real and often terrible, yet the historical record across the South makes clear that enslaved people were never simply passive. They judged risk constantly and acted where they could. A quiet lie may save a life, so may a truth told selectively. Imagine the skill involved in answering a question with just enough innocence to satisfy a suspicious man who already assumes he understands everything. Imagine keeping your face calm while deciding, in seconds, what to reveal, what to hide, and what to pretend not to know. That is a kind of performance forced upon people every day. It takes nerve. It takes discipline. It takes a memory for details sharper than most comfortable lives ever require. The body itself becomes part of this strategy. You learn how to look busy when necessary, how to appear less informed than you are, how to keep the face blank at the right moment, how to bend over a task while still hearing what is happening nearby, how to walk without seeming hurried even when the heart is racing. Power likes to imagine it sees everything. Much of plantation survival depends on proving that assumption false. Communication under watchful conditions becomes an art. A sentence may mean one thing on its surface and another in context. A message about visiting, sickness, a meeting, or a warning may travel through ordinary talk, through children running errands, through market trips, through songs, through church contact, through kin networks. Not every whisper is a conspiracy, of course. Sometimes people are just exchanging the ordinary facts of life, but under slavery, even ordinary facts can become sensitive information, because knowledge alters what people can prepare for. One fascinating detail from recollections of enslaved life is how often people used humour as cover. A teasing remark could carry a warning, a joke could distract attention, a fool's tone could hide a careful purpose. Pretending not to care too much, not to know too much, not to plan too much could be useful. Underestimating black intelligence was one of slavery's defining habits, and enslaved people sometimes turned that arrogance into a shield. Resistance also includes interior refusal. You may obey outwardly while rejecting the legitimacy of what is demanded. You may carry yourself with private contempt for those claiming to own you. You may remember ancestors, family, or a spiritual truth that place the whole plantation in a smaller frame. This inward resistance is difficult to measure, which means formal records often miss it. But anyone who has ever endured domination knows that inner refusal can be the ground from which other actions grow. Not all resistance is individual. Collective forms matter too. Workers may subtly coordinate pace. Women may share childcare in ways that protect mothers from impossible pressure. Neighbours may hide someone's absence for a little while. A community may maintain moral support around a person facing punishment, grief, or danger. Such acts rely on trust, and trust under surveillance is precious. It cannot be assumed. It is built slowly, through repeated proof of character. There are also limits. People cannot always resist in visible ways. Fear, exhaustion, family responsibility, age, illness, pregnancy, isolation, and the sheer force of violence all shape what is possible. It would be unfair and historically foolish to imagine resistance as constant dramatic defiance. Sometimes surviving quietly is the bravest available act. Sometimes staying alive for your children is the act. Sometimes holding your tongue is not surrender but strategy. This is where scholarly uncertainty enters as well. Historians argue over how best to classify different forms of enslaved resistance, especially the quieter ones. Some emphasize sabotage, escape attempts, and overt acts. Others insist, rightly, that preserving kinship, religion, dignity, and cultural life under slavery must also count as opposition to dehumanization. The debate matters, but the lived reality matters more. For the people on the plantation, the question was rarely theoretical. It was practical. What can be done? What must be hidden? What can be endured? What line cannot be crossed? The woods at the edge of the plantation often carry special meaning in this regard. They can be a place for hunting, gathering, prayer, meeting, hiding, or simply breathing without immediate eyes upon you. They can also be dangerous, filled with patrol risk, snakes, uneven ground, and uncertainty. The smell of leaf rot, pine resin, and damp earth may signal both danger and relief. Shade cools the skin. Branches soften sound. In the woods, the plantation's order weakens a little. Though never disappears entirely, night sharpens every calculation. Darkness offers cover, but it also magnifies risk. A footstep on a path sounds louder. A lantern in the distance becomes more significant. Dogs bark. Horses move in their stalls. A whispered conversation may feel both safer and more dangerous than it would by day. Still, many of the plantation's most important unsanctioned moments happen after sunset. Visits, prayers, planning, warnings, tenderness, stolen minutes of autonomy. The night belongs partly to fear and partly to possibility. You come to understand that slavery depends not only on force but on making people predictable. It wants your movements known, your time scheduled, your mind discouraged, your relationships monitored. Survival often means becoming less predictable than the system expects. Not recklessly, not theatrically, just enough. Enough to preserve a margin of self, a circle of trust, a hidden store of information, a plan not yet visible to those above you. There is something profoundly intelligent about this daily watchfulness. It is not the kind rewarded in schools or praised in newspapers. It is practical intelligence under pressure, sharpened by danger and sustained by community memory. Who can be trusted? Which rule bends? Which path is safer after rain? Which overseer notices too much? Which child can carry a message without drawing notice? Which excuse sounds plausible on a given day? That is a whole education. By evening, when the yard grows dim and voices lower, much of this knowledge is still moving quietly through the cabins. Someone warns another to be careful tomorrow. Someone reports a new mood at the big house. Someone notes a stranger on the road. Someone suggests waiting. Someone suggests moving quickly. Not everything becomes action. Some things remain only as caution stored for later, but that storage matters. Information is a kind of food under slavery. It keeps people alive. So daily life on an Alabama plantation is not only labor and punishment, it is also constant interpretation. You read the world because you must. You remember because forgetting is dangerous. You resist when possible, endure when necessary, and protect whatever private ground the plantation cannot fully seize. Under a regime of rules, the smallest unscripted human choice can carry astonishing weight. A pause, a warning, a withheld word, a hidden seed, a midnight prayer, a message delivered safely, a person helped quietly through one more hard day. None of it looks grand from a distance. Up close, it is the work of survival itself. The plantation never stands alone. Even when the cabins, fields, and woods seem to make a whole world, outside forces keep drifting in on wagon wheels, horseback, river traffic, market talk, and half-overheard conversation. You feel this most clearly on the days when strangers appear, or when familiar faces return carrying news from town. Suddenly the air changes. People who usually speak in plain practical ways lower their voices or sharpen them. Eyes follow the road. A child is sent off to play elsewhere, which usually means there is something adults do not want repeated in the wrong place. In Alabama in 1840, cotton ties the plantation to a much larger economy, and that economy is always humming somewhere beyond sight. Cotton bales move toward market, prices rise and fall according to distant demand. Credit stretches, snaps, and tightens again. Planters worry about debt, land, weather, and profit with the dramatic self-importance of men who mistake money problems for profound suffering. Yet their anxieties matter because they spill downward. When the market shifts, enslaved people feel the consequences in rations, sales, punishment, forced moves, and the general mood of those holding power. You do not need to read a newspaper to know that money is unsettled. You can hear it in the big house conversation carried through an open window. You can see it in the number of account books brought out, or in the arrival of a trader whose smile is too smooth. You notice when the planter rides to town more often. You notice when his temper worsens after returning. You notice when the overseer presses harder without giving a reason. News reaches the quarters not as polished headlines, but as disturbance. Markets are not abstract places in such a life. They are threats with addresses. The county town may be where supplies are bought, debts argued over, and human beings valued, hired, sold, or pledged. A person sent there on an errand might come back carrying more than flour or nails. They might bring snippets of talk about cotton prices in Mobile, rumours of traders moving through the district, or mention of a neighbour planning to sell several people. One trip can fill the cabins with unease for days. Mobile, by 1840, is one of Alabama's great commercial centres, its river and port connections helping carry cotton outward to the world. Enslaved people on inland plantations may never see its wharves, warehouses, and ships, yet the city shapes their lives anyway. Cotton moving downriver means labour demanded upriver. Global textile hunger has a long reach. Somewhere in Britain or the American North, mills spin and weave cloth, Somewhere in Alabama, a person bends over a row under the same economic logic. The distance is enormous, but the chain is direct. You hear names of places and people almost like weather patterns: Mobile, Montgomery; Selma, New Orleans; Natchez, Virginia; Carolina; river counties; Black Belt land; traders from somewhere east; a cousin carried down from somewhere north. These names do not arrive neutrally. They arrive freighted with memory and warning. For many black Americans on Alabama plantations, news from other places is personal, because movement through the domestic slave trade has already shaped their families. A county line might mean loss. A river port might mean sale. A town name might mean where a brother was last heard from. Rumor moves quickly because official information rarely serves the enslaved truthfully. Someone hears that cotton prices are down. Someone else insists they are up again. Someone says the master owes money. Another says he has bought more land. Someone whispers that a neighbouring plantation is being divided. Rumour is not always accurate, but it is often rational. People scan for patterns because their safety depends on anticipating the decisions of others. If a man is in debt, sale becomes more likely. If traders are nearby, anxiety grows. If an owner is speaking of moving west, families begin to calculate what that might mean. There is a sound to arriving news: wagon wheels over packed earth, hooves at an odd hour, a gate latch, men's voices from the yard, the jingle of harness metal. Even before any words are understood, the body goes alert. Strangers on a plantation are rarely ordinary visitors from the perspective of the enslaved. A preacher might come, so might a merchant, a relative, a doctor, a surveyor, or a slave trader. The difference matters immensely, and people learn to read small signs. A trader's eye travels differently. He looks at bodies with appraisal in it. That gaze is recognizable and hated. A particularly unsettling feature of market life is its habit of turning human emotion into business timing. A child's tears can exist in the same space as a discussion of prices. A mother's fear can be brushed aside by a note about credit. That is not a side effect. It is built into the institution. People in the quarters know this all too well. So when talk of sales or valuations begins, the atmosphere thickens. Tasks continue, but minds are elsewhere. A spoon scrapes a pot. A shirt is folded. A baby is rocked. Underneath, everyone is listening for what the next day may bring. At the same time, the world outside the plantation can carry possibility. News of relatives circulates through hired-out labourers, river workers, drivers, peddlers, washerwomen, preachers, and the invisible male roots of enslaved communities. Someone has seen your aunt in another county. Someone says your brother is on a plantation near the river. Someone heard that your mother's people were taken south but remained together. The uncertainty can be painful, yet any scrap of knowledge matters. It keeps people from disappearing entirely into silence. News also includes politics. Though not in the comfortable way free citizens experience politics, enslaved people hear about elections, speeches, laws, and public men because those things shape local power and white behaviour. By 1840, national political talk in the United States includes banks, westward expansion, states' rights, tariffs, and party contests. The plantation class has opinions on all of it, often loudly, and enslaved people hear enough to understand that white men are arguing over the government while leaving slavery itself firmly in place. It must have been a marvel of selective concern. Yet politics can still matter indirectly. New land acquired from native dispossession opens more cotton ground. Economic panic affects debt and sale. State laws regulate movement, assembly, literacy, and punishment. Public events may seem distant from the cabin, but their effects are not. A new county official with the zeal for patrol enforcement can change night travel risk. A planter emboldened by political talk about property rights may become harsher. Government enters plantation life through local force long before it arrives as any recognizable justice. Some enslaved people heard broader stories of resistance and rebellion from beyond Alabama, though details were often distorted in travel and rumor. News of uprisings, attempted escapes, abolitionist agitation, or unrest in other places could circulate in fragments. Not every name was known clearly, not every event arrived intact. Historians still argue about the speed and reliability with which such information spread through isolated rural plantations, since oral transmission leaves uneven traces. But the idea that enslaved communities were cut off from larger currents entirely is plainly false. Information moved through black networks with remarkable persistence. The most immediate outside force, though, may be the trader. No figure from the market world embodies dread more completely. Traders connect the plantation to debt, speculation, and the buying and selling of people on a wider scale. They may arrive dressed well, speak politely, and carry themselves like respectable businessmen, which only makes the whole thing more grotesque. Respectability has covered a great deal of cruelty in American history. On the plantation, everyone can smell the difference between a guest and a danger, even if both wear clean coats. Children notice traders too, though they may not understand every implication. They sense adult fear. They notice when conversations stop. They see mothers holding children closer. They hear names being spoken with unusual urgency. That emotional weather teaches them quickly. A stranger with a horse and an assessing eye is not merely a visitor. He belongs to the world that can split a family by noon. Still, not all contact with the outside comes through white authority. Markets, roads, and transport routes can create opportunities for exchange among black people. Enslaved and free black workers in towns, boat landings, kitchens, and workshops sometimes become carriers of information, practical help, and news. A woman sent to sell chickens or buy cloth might return with details from town. A hired hand might learn who has been moved nearby. A river worker might hear of prices, storms, diseases, or escape stories from places far beyond the county. Such networks are hard to chart precisely, but they mattered. There is a quirky little truth about rumour under pressure. People become experts in weighing the confidence of the teller, not just what is said, but how. Was the speaker breathless, calm, secretive? Was the story heard from a driver, a peddler, a child, a relative, a drunk white man talking too much in town? Information comes with texture. A community learns to judge tone almost as carefully as content. The sensory world of news is easy to miss if you imagine history only in documents. It lives in the smell of road dust on a returning wagon, the sight of new boot prints near the big house, the sound of paper being unfolded indoors, the clink of bottles or tools from town, the feel of tension in a room where everyone is pretending not to listen. News has body. It enters the plantation through objects, voices, moods, and motion long before anyone writes it down. Hope and dread mingle strangely in this atmosphere. A message from kin can bring comfort. A rumour of sale can bring sleeplessness. Word of a nearby death can darken the cabins. Talk of an owner travelling may create a brief sense of relief if oversight loosens. Mention of patrol activity may close that relief at once. Daily life becomes partly an exercise in absorbing outside information without letting it tear apart your nerve. There is also the question of escape, which belongs to the world of distant rumour even when no one near you is actively planning it. Stories travel of people who ran and were caught, people who ran and vanished, people helped by others, people betrayed, people who reached towns, swamps, riverboats, free states, or nothing but deeper danger. In Alabama in 1840, successful escape from the Deep South could be extraordinarily difficult. Yet the possibility remained part of the moral landscape. It existed as a thought, a caution, a dream, a warning, a whispered story that might steady one person and terrify another. Historians remain uncertain about the exact flow of abolitionist news and national anti-slavery debate into many rural Alabama plantations at this date, especially among people with little direct access to literacy. White suppression of information was real. Distance mattered, but oral channels, travel, and black community ties made total isolation impossible. The question is not whether enslaved people knew everything happening beyond them. They did not. The question is whether they knew enough to understand they were living inside a wider, contested world. Very often, they did. Night falls, and the road grows quiet again. The visitors have gone, or perhaps they remain at the big house, which can be worse. In the cabins, voices settle low around fires and doorways. Someone repeats what they heard. Someone corrects a detail. Someone dismisses one rumour and takes another seriously. Children doze while adults keep sorting meaning from fragments. A horse snorts in the distance. The smell of smoke and cooling earth fills the yard. Somewhere beyond the trees, towns, ports, courts, markets, and political halls keep moving, though unseen. You lie down knowing the plantation is never only itself. The next change may come from rain, from sickness, from a trader's ledger, from a drop in cotton prices, from a river port, from a local law, from a message carried by a trusted traveller, from some faraway argument among people who have never seen your face. That knowledge is exhausting. It is also clarifying. Survival in Alabama plantation life means enduring not only the immediate demands of labour and control, but the constant pressure of outside forces arriving in bits and blows. The road is quiet now, but everyone knows it will speak again. By the time night gathers fully over the plantation, the most important work may be the work no ledger can count. The fields are behind you for the day. The tools are set aside. The voices from the big house have dimmed into distance. Yet inside the cabins, along the yard, near the cooking fires, and in the quiet chambers of the mind, another labour continues. It is the labour of keeping hold of yourself. In Alabama in 1840, that is no small thing. Every part of plantation life is built to reduce a person to use, price, and obedience. To remain a full human being under such pressure requires memory, style, humour, tenderness, belief, and the stubborn refusal to let the soul flatten. You can see personhood first in the smallest gestures. A woman folds a head wrap with care even after an exhausting day. A man smooths a rough board before using it as a seat, as if dignity begins with how you occupy space. A child insists on carrying a treasured rag doll or carved toy tucked under one arm. Someone sweeps the yard, though dust will return tomorrow. These are practical actions, yes, but they are also statements. They say your life is more than labour. They say order, beauty, and preference still matter. The plantation does not like preference very much. Preference suggests an inner world. It is easier to dominate people if you pretend they are simple. Yet enslaved people maintain tastes, dislikes, habits, jokes, pet names, rivalries, courtship styles, favourite songs, favourite foods, favourite places to sit in the evening, favourite stories to hear retold. Such details may seem ordinary, but ordinary life is exactly what slavery tries to steal. To prefer one hymn over another, one way of braiding hair over another, one seasoning over another, is to insist on being a self. Humour lives powerfully in this space. It can be dry, sly, gentle, ridiculous, or sharp enough to leave a mark without being noticed by the wrong ears. Someone imitates the overseer's stiff walk just enough to make a few adults turn away and hide smiles. Someone remarks that a mule has more judgment than certain men with the boots. A child repeats a grown person's phrase in exactly the wrong tone, and accidentally becomes the funniest person in the yard for 10 whole seconds. Laughter does not erase suffering. It makes breathing inside suffering more possible. There is something almost rebellious about amusement under oppression. Power expects either submission or visible resistance. It is less prepared for a people who can still laugh among themselves, still recognize foolishness, still refuse to grant dignity to those who have not earned it. A joke does not free the body, but it protects the mind from surrendering entirely to the plantation's version of reality. Music does similar work. You hear it in a low hum while someone mends clothing, in a child rocking side to side with a tune half remembered, in a strong voice carrying through the cabin after dark, in hand rhythm tapped softly on a knee. Songs can hold grief, longing, prayer, wit, warning, comfort, and plain delight. Not every song is solemn. Some are playful, some are teasing. Some move with a rhythm that lifts tired bodies for a few minutes beyond the day's strain. Sound creates a shared world where the plantation's categories lose some of their power. Dance can belong here too, where space and circumstance allow it. A few steps in the yard, a heel marking time on hard ground, a turn of the shoulders, a child's delighted attempt to copy an elder. The body that has been made to labour all day can still move for pleasure. courtship, worship, or self-expression. That matters deeply. Forced movement and chosen movement are not the same thing. One drains, the other restores. Courtship itself reveals personhood in ways slavery could never fully suppress. A man straightens his shirt before visiting someone he hopes to impress. A woman adjusts a kerchief and pretends not to notice him immediately, which is its own kind of elegant power. Glances matter, timing matters, the exchange of a small gift matters, a carved trinket, a ribbon, a saved bit of sweetness, a kind word offered at the right moment. Romance under slavery is burdened with danger and instability, yet it still contains wit, flirtation, awkwardness, and genuine joy. Human affection refuses to become merely tragic. Elders play a special role in preserving personhood because they carry continuity. An older woman may know the names of people long gone, the origin of a family recipe, the herb that eases a cough, the right phrase for settling a quarrel, the story behind a nickname, the old song verse younger people have forgotten. An older man may remember roots, weather signs, birth stories, burial places, and kin connections stretching across counties and decades. Their knowledge organizes memory against the chaos slavery tries to impose. Memory is one of the plantation's great battlegrounds. If people forget who they are, where they came from, and who belongs to them, domination grows easier. So memory must be practiced. Family names are repeated, places are described, ancestors are mentioned. A child is told whose smile she carries, whose temper he inherited, which aunt was known for singing, which grandfather could mend anything with wood and patience. Memory becomes an inheritance system stronger than paper because paper in this world is too often written by enemies. You can feel that preservation of identity in naming. Children may be named after kin, biblical figures, admired elders, or people whose memory deserves carrying forward. Nicknames spring up too, affectionate and communal, often reflecting personality, appearance, or some small event that becomes legendary within the cabins. A person known by a cherished nickname exists inside a social world far richer than any ledger entry. The plantation may record one thing, community says another. Often the community knows better. Craft also helps preserve selfhood. A basket woven neatly, a spoon carved smooth, a patch sewn with unusual care, a gourd shaped for use and beauty, a quilt pieced from scraps if cloth can be spared. These objects are practical, but they can also hold style. The curve of a handle, the pattern of stitching, the choice to make something a little finer than bare necessity requires. Such decisions are not trivial. They prove the imagination is still active. One quirky truth about life under hardship is that people can become very proud of tiny excellences. The best broom in the quarters, the most evenly baked corn cakes, the cleanest swept yard, the sharpest joke teller, the strongest singer, the person who can calm any crying baby, the man who fixes broken tools faster than anyone else. These local reputations create honor where official society offers none. A human community naturally develops standards of admiration, and those standards often reveal what it values most. Spiritual life belongs here as well, not only in organized worship but in the daily habits of meaning. A whispered prayer before sleep, a psalm line recalled at a hard moment, respect shown at burial grounds, care taken with the dead, dreams spoken of seriously in morning light. Faith helps locate the self beyond ownership. If the soul belongs to God, then the master's claim is already smaller than he pretends. That theological truth could steady a person through astonishing difficulty. Burial customs reveal much about personhood too. Death under slavery is painful not only because of loss, but because the system often denies people the time and peace proper grieving requires. Yet communities still gather when they can. They sing, they pray, they remember, they mark the resting place as best they are able. Funerary practices vary, and historians debate how much older African-influenced customs remained visible in different regions by 1840, but the underlying impulse is unmistakable. The dead must be honoured as persons, not as expired property. Children absorb all of this quietly. They learn who is funny, who is wise, who is strict, who is generous, who sings beautifully, who tells the best stories, who remembers the old names, who can heal a bee sting, who keeps promises. Through that learning, they inherit a social map far richer than the Plantations' categories. They grow up knowing that the real measure of a person is not what the owner says, but what the community sees and remembers. Storytelling may be the clearest nightly proof that personhood endures. In the dim cabin light, a voice begins with a tale of clever animals, stubborn people, strange accidents, old family events, or near unbelievable local characters. Children lean closer. Adults pretend not to be listening while listening very carefully. Stories entertain, but they also teach caution, wit, moral judgment, and resilience. The trickster survives because he notices more. The foolish character suffers because he boasts too much. The patient one endures. The proud one falls. There is wisdom wrapped inside amusement. The atmosphere of those moments is easy to imagine. Firelight flickering over faces, smoke drifting upward, the rough feel of blanket cloth over tired legs, a baby asleep against someone's chest, night insects pulsing outside the walls, laughter breaking softly and then settling. The cabin is small, but the imaginative world inside it is vast. Story carries people beyond the field without moving their bodies an inch. There is scholarly uncertainty about how fully we can recover the inner emotional lives of enslaved people in Alabama in 1840, because the archive is fragmentary and often filtered through hostile or limited observers. Records preserve sale, punishment, and production more readily than humour, affection, style, or self-understanding. Yet the absence of complete documentation does not mean the absence of rich interior life. It means only that power was better at recording what it valued than what truly mattered, and what truly matters in the end. Is this black Americans on Alabama plantations did not survive daily life by becoming less human. They survived by protecting humanity with extraordinary skill. They made family where the law refused it. They made food from scarcity. They made music in exhaustion. They made prayer in fear. They made jokes under watchfulness. They made names, memories, gardens, stories, remedies, romances, and local honour within a world designed to strip all of that away. That does not romanticize suffering. Nothing should. The violence of slavery remains total in its intent and devastating in its effects. Yet within that brutality, enslaved people created and sustained real worlds of meaning. They were not merely acted upon. They acted. They chose, adapted, loved, remembered, interpreted, and endured. Even when options were terribly narrow, they found ways to keep selfhood alive in gesture, relation, and thought. So when night settles and the cabin's quiet, the deepest truth of plantation life is not only exhaustion, though exhaustion is certainly there. It is also continuity. Someone still knows the family names. Someone still hums the tune. Someone still saves a seed. Someone still comforts a child. Someone still teases a friend. Someone still prays. Someone still tells a story that makes the room warmer. These are not decorations around history. They are the centre of it. And now the voices grow softer. The fire lowers to a red glow. Outside, the Alabama night spreads across the fields and trees, vast and dark and humming with insects. Inside, breathing slows. The rough blanket settles over tired shoulders. The room smells of smoke, worn wood, and the faint trace of supper. Thoughts begin to loosen their grip. The names, songs, and small acts of care that carried the day remain in the air like embers, still warm, still alive. You let the cabin dim around you. The earth beneath the floor holds a little stored heat, far off. A night bird calls once and then is quiet. Closer by, someone turns in sleep. Another breathes deeply, steadily, as if the whole room might follow that rhythm into rest. There is no need now to hold every detail so tightly. You can let the worries drift to the edges. Let the road fall silent. Let the fields dissolve into darkness. Let the voices that mattered most become gentle and low. Like a final hymn carried on warm night air, you rest with the image of hands still making life from almost nothing. Hands braiding hair, stirring pots, mending cloth, lifting children, touching shoulders, folding memory carefully so it will not be lost. The world outside remains harsh, but inside this quiet, something endures that cannot be priced properly and cannot be fully taken. It softens the room, it softens the breath. It asks for nothing now except stillness, so the night deepens. The cabin fades into shadow, the ground cools, the insects sing on, and you drift down into that slow dark where history becomes hush, where human voices become warmth, where even sorrow loosens for a while, and where the long burden of the day finally gives way to rest.